I think we'll get started. We're in the home stretch here, second day, afternoon session. So thanks for everyone for joining us. I just wanted to start by thanking Brian and everyone with the Seattle Interactive group for bringing such a great lineup of dynamic speakers and incredible content to Seattle. Did anyone have a chance to see Jason Silva's mind-expanding speech yesterday? Anyone see that? I think that was, for me, my favorite part so far, and I don't know what I'm more jealous of, his energy, his optimism, or his intellect, probably a combination of all three. But if you didn't see it, go check out some of his videos online. It was a really, really great speech. My name is Paul Peterman. I work at Facebook in Global Marketing Solutions. And we're pleased to be here today. I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a minute. I know there have been a lot of conversations about social here at Seattle Interactive this year. And it's been something I think that's been part of every session that I've attended. And it's easy to recognize. I think the reason is because it's really easy to recognize the promise of building stronger, lasting relationships with customers, with people, and activating word of mouth at scale and putting that to work for your brands. Last year, is that better? Last year I sat on the stage and we had a really good dialogue, and a lot of the questions I would put into the why category. Why should we be thinking about organizing our marketing around social? Why should we be using social to why should we be having social being a bigger part of our paid media strategy? There's a lot of the why. And I think that this year we've seen a real change in the dialogue we're having with brands and the dialogue we're having and the questions we're having in the marketplace. I'd say it's really shifted to how. And and I think a lot of that is because so many brands have jumped in and are doing tremendous things right now, and there's so many success stories out there. So how should we be thinking about integrating social into our organization, our business marketing strategy, our product strategy? And this is a really fun time because at Facebook, our platform has evolved and there's always innovation going on. But in the last year, there's been a tremendous amount of opportunity created for brands to leverage the entire part of the marketing funnel, from building awareness to consideration to purchase and conversion, and even deepening loyalty. And so I think that's a really exciting time for marketers. We're seeing a lot of tremendous successes out there for big brands and small businesses alike. And then finally, to wrap up the intro, I would say, I think the greatest impact you can have with social is not to think of it as a channel or something that's siloed within one piece of your marketing or your PR strategy. And rather, it's more like the connective tissue that's weaved throughout your business and your marketing strategies that helps engage and drive growth across all your customer touch points. So we're going to touch on a lot of those type of strategies today. I'm very pleased to be joined by three great panelists to talk about how three very different brands are thinking about social and their overall marketing and business mix to drive results. On my left here is Scott Willoughby. He's a franchise marketing manager at PopCap Games, where he spearheads social, community, and online marketing design and innovation for multiple PopCap brands, including their latest, Solitaire Blitz. And Seattle-based PopCap is a gaming leader with award-winning hits like Bejeweled, Zuma, Peggle, and the aptly named for Halloween Plants vs. Zombies. They have been tremendously successful. They were acquired by Electronic Arts last year. In the center is Kirsten Ward, who's a senior director in Microsoft's Central Marketing Group, where she's responsible for marketing strategy and execution across Xbox, Bing, and MSN in over 10 global markets. Kirsten was a member of the core leadership team responsible for the launch of Bing back in 2009. It seems like it's been a lot longer than 2009, but my goodness. And has been a leader, a contributor to multiple award-winning campaign initiatives during her time at Microsoft. And finally, we also have Sarah Keeling-Gavin. It's the Director of PR and Social for Expedia. And she holds responsibility for influential programs across press, bloggers, broadcasts, and social media for the Expedia consumer brand in the US. And Sarah has a strong background in technology communications and is passionate about the marriage of technology and travel. I think there's a lot of opportunity there for someone to reach out and grab that. So to start out, I mentioned a lot of brands are still thinking about social as its own channel, but in reality, it impacts a lot of different aspects of your business and your customer touch points. And broadening that view can help you drive extraordinary results. Sarah, how does a company like Expedia evolve to integrate social into its marketing mix?
Yes, it's a great question. So I joined Expedia about a year ago, and I was kind of amazed when I joined. There had been, I think, 4 different people in charge of social media in the year before I joined. So it would pop between, oh, this is part of engineering, or this is part of brand, or this is part of PR, or this is part of our loyalty program, or things like that. And so there hadn't really been any sort of consistency, and no one had kind of glommed onto it. And then what we really discovered is it can really be this glue for our organization. So, if you sort of think about the Expedia sort of goal, there's sort of two groups that we serve, right? So we serve travelers. Raise your hand if you travel. Excellent, fantastic. You're a great example then. So, we serve travelers, and certainly we can reach travelers through social media. But there's also this sort of whole other group that we serve, which is all of our suppliers, so our hotel partners and things like that. And what we've found is we can really use social as this way to sort of bring back integrated marketing. So everybody sort of talks about integrated marketing, but it never really gets all that integrated. And social's been able to do that by sort of bringing those two sort of business objectives together. So take an example of like Cancun, clearly a huge destination for US travelers. We were able to do a lot of really great sort of Cancun campaigns on Facebook. They, for the consumer, it seemed like a great brand campaign, right? Like you're going to look at pictures of beautiful hotels and beautiful beaches, and you're really going to engage with Expedia from this sort of great brand place. So it's a brand play. And then we're also able to look at it as a direct response play. So it turns out, when we did our Cancun week, we called it Cinco de Expedia, because we're really clever like that. So when we did Cinco de Expedia, we saw a ton of lift for the hotels that participated. We also saw a lift for the entire Mexico market. And while that was just sort of the week, there was a 5-day countdown, we then looked at sort of the 30 days after that and continued to see significant lift in that market. So all sort of fantastic for direct response, which really helps sort of bring together this other sort of section of the organization. And then you look at sort of the folks who work with the hoteliers, and what an amazing story to be able to sort of differentiate us from other online travel agencies to say, hey, you, dear hotel, have a need to go out there and have a social media strategy. Just like we're your partners across the rest of the business, we can be your partners in social. And so that brought together this sort of other piece of the organization. And so what we've seen is, by having campaigns like that sort of span the group, we now have this sort of galvanized energy around social that really, every part of the marketing organization and into engineering is really behind it in a way that's really different from anything we've ever seen.
Kirsten, in Microsoft, you direct strategy for 2 very different brands. I mean, Xbox is such a leader in the gaming space and the center of home entertainment, and then Bing is a very well-known brand, but still in a challenger position when you look at market share. How are you approaching those 2 different brands? I suppose the strategies are a little different.
Sure, happy to answer that. For one, it keeps my job very interesting because I get to think about 2 very different brands and spaces at the company. So I'll give a little bit of context on my role. I manage all of our paid media investments across those 2 brands. And so I work very closely with the social teams that are in those organizations. But I spend most of my time thinking through, how and where do we reach consumers, particularly with advertising dollars. And so there's a few layers probably to my answer here. I think in the context of social, one of the similarities across, Bing and Xbox is, we try to be grounded in our marketing approach in terms of, the business and the marketing and the brand goals first and foremost, and then we think about, in the context of those, how do we want to reach consumers across all the touch points, and what's the role of traditional advertising relative to social media, relative to PR, and so it does tend to come to life very differently. With something like Bing, we do have a healthy base on Facebook as well as Twitter, but it is certainly smaller compared to an Xbox or even a Halo. And so when we think about how we activate those communities, We think a lot about, first of all, just bringing the brands to life in a way that's very unique and authentic to that brand and engaging to the community. But we also think about the role of sort of organic versus paid, and how and when do we choose to add dollars to improve scale. So, even for something like Xbox, where we have 19 million Facebook likes, we still at times want to add fuel to that fire, even though we have a huge reach with just people that have already raised their hand and are engaging with this brand. There's still times where we want to reach and go beyond that.
Speaking of gaming, the gaming industry, games are more fun with friends, right? So, that's the gaming industry has probably been one that's been transformed, or one of the first to be just really fully transformed through social integration. How has your organization evolved with that?
Those of you that follow gaming know there's been a massive, massive sea change in the gaming industry over the last couple of years, moving to social and connected gaming, as well as freemium and microtransaction-based gaming. And at PopCap, it's completely changed our entire organization. When I started there about 2 years ago, social and connected gaming represented a tiny fraction of our annual revenue. I was the one and only person who was in charge of doing the social marketing for our games. Fast forward a year, and it was responsible for the majority of our revenue. It had completely changed. At that point, it had gotten so big that we totally reorganized the company to restructure around connected and social gaming and using social channels to acquire, engage, and convert users. There's not a project we work on now that does not have social and connected elements involved in it. So it's incredibly, incredibly important for us. It's a big part of the reason EA purchased PopCap a year ago, was because of the things we were doing in social and the successes we were having in it, and our knowledge about how to use social, not just on Canvas or on Facebook, but connect other communications elements of our other franchises in, and really weave that tapestry to engage our users in some of the best ways that have been happening out there. We've got incredibly, incredibly engaged, lively, active communities.
So how does your marketing team, I assume that there's some strong synergies now between like your marketing team, the people that are developing the games, and the developers. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. When we reorged about a year ago to reorganize the company around social game development and connected gaming development, part of the thing we did was to really take once upon a time, there was sort of the studio side of the house that made the games, and there was the publishing side of the house that did the marketing and sold them and did all that fun stuff. That is no more. Now publishing and business and marketing are integrated with the game team. I sit right across from the producers of the games that I work on. I talk with them every day. I sit in development meetings, because one of the big things about changing to a social and connected and microtransaction freemium gaming space especially is that once upon a time it used to be the game developers just had to make a really cool game. They didn't have to worry about the transaction or the retention of users at all. We worried about getting somebody to spend money at a cash register or via download, and then all they had to do was hope the game was cool enough that those people weren't pissed off after they spent their money on it. Not the case anymore. Now they have to think about the business and the marketing and the connectivity and the monetization within the design of that game. We have to have those things happen as people play the game and come back day after day. So it's been a real learning curve for the designers and the game developers, as well as for the company, to get their head around a really fast-moving live-action software as a service sort of model compared to the old premium download space.
And Sarah, you talked about that balance between brand and loyalty and sales. And I know that you guys have been doing a lot of work around this and modeling to kind of to look at the results. Do you want to talk about a few of the projects you guys have worked on?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of them really are around sort of destination-focused pieces. So things like Vegas, again, fantastic example. You look at some of the challenges that we face. We have this big sort of Facebook following. It's the largest of any of the sort of online travel agencies. We're not quite at that Xbox number yet, but within, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, I'm sure we'll be there.
Yeah.
So we're sort of doing incredibly well against any of sort of our competitor set. But gosh, how do you think about sort of reaching somebody who is going to a bachelor party in Vegas versus someone who's really excited about the launch of Cars Land at Disneyland. Those are two very different population sets. I mean, you don't really want to confuse bachelor party at Disneyland, although maybe if that's your thing. But so what we've really sort of looked at is how do we have success with the sort of core population, sort of adding in sort of the right targeting and the right sort of ad spend. And we've had tremendous, tremendous success. So, you know, in Vegas, we did sort of a similar thing to that Cancun project that we talked about, where, you know, it was sort of Vegas week, we had giveaways, you know, we showed off some of the different hotels, in particular some hotels that had been remodeled. So again, sort of serving that sort of supplier and hotelier side of our business to sort of provide additional value to them. You know, across the board, we saw on the days that those hotels were being shown off, double or triple digit year-over-year growth of bookings. And again, you've got, from a brand perspective, there you are engaging with Expedia around Vegas if you're someone who loves Vegas, and if we're sort of, you know, using smart targeting. And the flip side, you know, literally I think the week later was the launch of Cars Land, and we did, this is one that I just sort of love, we worked with a local Seattle travel blogger named the Hip Travel Mama. We sent her to Cars Land, and we let her really sort of take over the keys to the kingdom. We gave her Facebook admin access, and as she was going around the launch of Cars Land for 36 hours, she owned our Facebook page. We didn't sort of pre-screen the pictures, we didn't pre-screen the content. As she was on the red carpet, she could post whatever she wanted. As she was sort of getting the tours, she could post whatever she wanted. And it was this extremely positive sort of brand engagement. And then again, what we saw during that 36 hours, we doubled visits to our Disney landing page on Expedia.com. And so just tremendously valuable to look at. You know, we have this rich content, you know, partnering with this really credible third-party blogger. We're being incredibly authentic. I mean, we're very, very public about, you know, we gave her the keys to the Magic Kingdom, actually. And then, you know, sort of boosting that with Facebook ads to have this very good sort of ROI positive and positive, you know, brand experience.
Kirsten, you know, your social activation strategies aren't one size fits all. And I know for Bing, can you talk? I know you came off a really successful program on Facebook with Bing, but you know, how do you look at Facebook and Twitter and you know, maybe you can talk a little bit about that Summer of Doing campaign as well.
Yeah, you bet. So I think I'll talk about two very different campaigns that we've done recently that are related to Bing that I think provides a good kind of landscape. So as hopefully many of you know, Bing and Facebook have a deep product partnership. So we take all the Facebook information and embed those into our search results to try to make search results more personalized. So when you search, you can see the web results and algorithmic results, but you can also see relevant results from your friends. And so when we launched that campaign, we partnered closely with Facebook to think through how do we bring this to life on Facebook. Like, these are presumably the people that are going to be most interested in this type of feature. And we created a campaign called the Summer of Doing. And so it was a month-long campaign where we basically, we had a lot of fun with it creatively. So it was created specifically for social media, and every day we posted content related to some sort of summer activity, and like gardening or food trucking, glamping. So we got a little bit crafty with how we wanted to engage, but it was really, the idea was tying in something that was relevant to our consumers over the summer with a fun twist, and then that drove to people experiencing the social experience on our site. And it was definitely one of the most successful campaigns we've had for Bing. We saw really high engagement with the content, a lot of sharing of the content. So that was one example of Bing kind of creating our own news and our own campaign. With Bing, we've also spent a lot of time thinking about, given that it's a challenger brand and underdog, we've thought a lot about, you know, how can we get scale through working with other partners. And so we, with MTV, partnered very closely with the Video Music Awards this year. As some of you may know, that generated more chatter this year than the Super Bowl. So we knew that MTV was this water cooler moment that, you know, our target audience of 18 to 34-year-olds would be highly tuned into. So we wanted to look at how do we attach to that moment as a brand. And we created with MTV a new award category called the Most Share-Worthy Video. So they had never done this category before. It was purely digital. So we, with MTV, promoted this award and said, come in and tweet your who you vote for this award. There ended up being a war between Justin Bieber and his fans and One Direction's fans, which ended up generating over 51 million tweets and votes for this award. And Bing was mentioned in over 50% of those just through the voting mechanism. So we achieved this remarkable scale by attaching to something that was a moment created outside of our brand.
Well, that's awesome. I'll add a couple other thoughts to that Summer Doing campaign did on Facebook. That I think that there were a couple key pieces of that are really interesting to us. Number one, you guys had a really engaging creative strategy, really engaging images and copy, and you had a calendar and you had a plan, and your fans and their friends, were essentially conditioned to this campaign that you were doing. So they got the themes, and there was a daily theme, there's a weekly theme. So it was really well thought out, and it's a lot of brands can I think take some lessons from that. It also, it started with the social integration on the product side, and some products you can integrate social into, and some are harder to do. It's harder in the CPG space, let's say. But from there on the marketing side, you guys also followed a pretty a good best practice that we have of connecting with users, kind of building up your fan base in advance of a campaign, engaging with your advertising and your messaging, both organically and from a paid perspective to create more viral engagement, and then also influencing and leveraging friends through sponsored stories, so that when one of your fans, because your fans are usually the people that will engage with your content the most, when one of your fans takes that action, you want to make sure that their friends see it. And so that was a really, you guys had some really good strategies around that. And I would say, lastly, that Bing was one of the first brands to really leverage some of the advertising that we rolled out in the news feed, and saw tremendous results and engagement as a result from it. So it was a really solid campaign. There's actually going to be a case study, I think, coming out soon for that. Scott, how do you guys think about content? Your games are content, and your games create content, but then how do you think about content when you're trying to build a story and leveraging your communities and their friends?
Yeah, there's a couple different approaches we take, and primarily on sort of a day-to-day basis. For us, our Facebook community channels are used to engage those users. Our biggest goal, as is the goal with I think most people, is to get into as many feeds as we can. We want as many people to see our content who are playing the game, to remind them that they like this game. Maybe they haven't played it today, they should come back in and enjoy it again. We have tremendous luck with that. We've had really great success with our engagement and our community metrics around the reach of our posts and the participation that we get with them. Part of the big reason for that success that we've found over the last few years is just kind of paying attention to some fundamental marketing stuff that people oftentimes overlook with Facebook and other community and social channels a lot of the times. I think I saw one of my community managers, Patrick, walk into the room, and this guy, he runs one of the pages for one of our games, Lucky Gem Casino. This is a game that has about 500,000 fans, one of our smaller communities, routinely gets 10,000, 15,000 likes per post, multiple times a day, and thousands of comments to go along with it. That sort of engagement rate is unbelievable. If you've ever done the math or looked at some of the top brands around engagement, it's insane. It's just call to action. When you're posting to Facebook, when you're using social, think about all the other marketing stuff you do. Include calls to action, ask people questions, pay attention to what they like, think about how they're using your product. In our case, what are they doing in the game? What are they looking for? What are they hoping to accomplish? What are the big rewards for them? And then include those in your social communications. That's for our day-to-day stuff. On some of our larger scale things, we look at creating compelling stories around our brands and around our games to help transition people. These are things like if we're launching a new game, if we're relaunching a new game, if we're putting out new features or doing any sort of major product updates, it's important for us to build excitement for users, because that engagement in the social gaming space particularly is so important. So it's always great to have new stories to tell people, hey, keep coming back. There's something something new coming. We've got more coming for you. You want to make sure you're still here in a week or 2 weeks or a month to see this new stuff that's coming out. So we use email and social and in-game banner advertising, and we integrate these stories together across all of them. We target them to users based on how long they've been in the game. Are they monetizing? What other games do they play? What are their statistics? Who are they? And we try to make it as individual an experience as we can within all that messaging, and then tie it into a larger narrative that we share on our walls and our Twitter accounts and our other sort of broad voice social channels. And it's worked really, really well for us in a lot of cases.
And you shared an example with me of when you did just that, can you give us that example?
Yeah, we talked a little bit earlier. We just relaunched Zuma Blitz, which I don't know, has anybody played Zuma Blitz in the audience? Couple. It's not one of our bigger games. It launched about 2 years ago, and when it did, it launched to huge success. It was actually bigger than Bejeweled Blitz for a little while on Facebook. Unfortunately, it was then plagued with a lot of downtime and a lot of server-side issues and other little things that caused it to lose a lot of audience very quickly. But it held on to a really dedicated core audience that was very valuable while the studio team redeveloped the game. As we got ready to look at relaunching it, we learned that one of the decisions they'd made was that in re-architecting this thing from the ground up, the unfortunate side effect was going to be that when we moved all these users over, these dedicated, paying users that were very, very sticky, their accounts were all going to get reset back to square one. And these are people that had dedicated hundreds of hours into playing this game. Normally in that situation, you expect massive rage quits. You're going to lose about half your audience. And that's kind of what we thought was going to happen. So I sat down with my community team and our creative labs team, and we looked at how can we create a really cool, compelling story around this transition to make sure that people will at least give the new game a chance. Before they get in there and see that they're going to be reset, they'll be so curious about it that even though they may be pissed off, they'll go give it a try and see how much better it is than their old experience and hopefully stick around. So we rolled out this multi-month campaign, this whole story. Zuma is set on a Polynesian island. So it was this whole story about how this explorer had gone and found a new island off over the horizon and had found all these new things, and we were teasing out new features and new content that he'd found and building this whole thing that the volcano on the existing island, the volcano god was upset and it was going to erupt and the island was going to sink, and you had to get on your boat and sail to the new island. This rolled out over months across all the channels we had. So when the migration eventually came, people went over to the new game. First, they were greeted by Island Girl, who's this little hula chick and like coconut bra. And she exchanged your old currency for new currency and gave you some bonuses and lots of cool stuff. So you're like, all right, that's pretty sweet. I just got hooked up. And then you go in and you play the new game. And as expected, with the change, we had a lot of negative feedback on the wall. We totally knew that was going to happen. We knew it would blow over. But the end result was we kept all of our old users, we gained new users, and all of our performance metrics improved. To our knowledge, nobody has been able to relaunch a game on Facebook in this manner and not totally torch their audience. So it was a huge win, and it all came down to putting together a holistic messaging campaign and creating a good, compelling story for those users around the product and why they should stay with us and give it a new shot.
That's a great story. And I know, Kirsten, like, no one's been greeted by hula girls when they go to Bing.com yet, but you know, you talked about some of the successes that you've had, you know, this year, and how does the collaboration look like on that? Like, how do you get there? I know that Microsoft has a lot of agencies that you guys work with, you know, a lot of really talented teams. So how do you get there? How do you go from that business challenge to the results you've been able to produce?
Let's see. I mean, I think it does look different. I work with, you know, two very different business groups. One is the online group and one is the Xbox group, and it does look different. So with Bing, we're an online service. We tend to plan on shorter horizons. So it's a faster process, I would say. With Xbox, you know, we plan very far out, knowing we know, you know, our product release cycles and our gaming cycles. So it takes different forms. But I would say in general, you know, I think we're all striving to do connected marketing, and so we try to think through, we try to ground everyone at the beginning with, what are the goals that we're trying to reach, who's the target, what are the insights to that target, and then what's, across both, from a media perspective, what are the right channels to activate, but then across all of our touch points, how do we architect a campaign that is unique to each channel and leverages the strengths of each channel, but that is also ultimately connected in spirit. And I think, frankly, we do it better in some cases than others. But a lot of it just comes down to collaboration. And I think some of it's touch points at the right time, because you can't always, you can't collaborate all the time. You need to be able to allow teams to do their work. And so we try to just make sure that we're connecting at the right time. So as we develop media strategies that impact social, our social media channels, that we're not doing that in a vacuum. We're saying, well, we think this is about where we're going to invest in social media in the context of everything else, but let's talk to Facebook directly, as well as our social teams internally and our agencies to say, well, what are your plans with social? And how do we think Facebook media can play a role in this campaign? And so it's a lot of conversation and a lot of meetings.
Yeah. Sarah, I know that you guys recently had some really strong success with a video, which is a good story. Do you want to tell that?
We did, yeah. Is this one on? Do we need to switch again?
Okay, good. Now.
So yeah, I kind of love this story. So Expedia launched a new campaign this summer called Find Yours, and it's sort of our new multi-year campaign. And it's really different for the travel space. Typically travel, you think about travel ads, right? You've got Shatner, you've got Gnomes. We made lots of little jokes, and it's all very sort of, hey, I'm going to come up with some clever way to tell you something that is very function-based and very transactional. Book here, click this, save this. And Find Yours is, there we go. And Find Yours is very, very different. It's really all about this idea that, hey, Expedia has all of this scale, so no matter what kind of moment it is that you're looking for, we can help you find yours. And it's a campaign that's really designed to have a lot of social legs. We recently launched a video. We actually launched it on the morning of the first presidential debate, purposely. So we launched a video about, that was this sort of mini documentary about this man who was going to his daughter's wedding. And he's from rural Georgia. It's a true story. It had a lot of their sort of real footage. And the twist of it was his daughter was marrying a woman. And sort of same-sex marriage was not ever anything that he was comfortable with. He talks in the video about how that just wasn't the dream that he had for his daughter. He, expected her to grow up and have a husband. And he sort of, it's the story of sort of what happened when he flew from rural Georgia and went out to LA, and he talks about sort of finding his understanding, and he's sort of faced with this choice of, do you want to have a relationship with your daughter or do you not? And he gets out there and he sort of sees this spark in her eyes, and it's this incredibly beautiful story. And we sort of told it for a few reasons. One, it's really about how travel is very, very personal. Whether it's a big trip or a little trip, there's something sort of personal, and every trip sort of has that opportunity to be transformational. But we also really wanted to get a conversation started about marriage equality sort of in this election cycle. It's something that's very near and dear. It's a really sort of core part of who we are at Expedia. We were one of the first companies to do an It Gets Better video. And so we really thought, it went along with the referendum in Washington State. It went along with a statement from us sort of supporting that, and then coming up with a story. But then the challenge is, well, how do you sort of put this out in the world and have the kind of good, positive conversation that we wanted to have? Because certainly there's a lot of people sort of against the story. There's a lot of folks who we knew were going to be for it, and then there was this sort of middle ground. And what we really wanted to reach was, hey, no matter sort of what side of the issue you're on, it's really hard to argue with the fact that this is really about a father who loves his daughter. Like, if you're against that, sorry. And so we really looked at how do we think about sort of social sharing, and how do we think about sponsored stories. It's one thing if Expedia is trying to share this video with you. It's very different if it's your friend who is sharing this, and if what we're doing is a sponsored story that boosts the fact that it's your friend who wants you to see this video. And I think over the course of the first couple, or over the course of the first week, we had 2 million views, we had 9,000 shares, 31,000 likes. And it's been this incredibly positive story. I mean, you think about, you were talking a little bit about that mix of paid versus organic, and it wrapped up just sort of the most recent piece about it was a 13-minute NPR story about the video. Think about the last time you sort of had a company that had 13 minutes dedicated to them on NPR that wasn't, a disaster of some kind. I can think of lots of those. But so this tremendously positive, positive impact kind of a story. And comments were positive. What we saw is the community sort of corrected itself when there were negative comments. And it really, I spent a lot of time sort of reading through the conversation on Facebook and Twitter and the YouTube comments. And just a lot of, really people who were really impacted in a major way, which is what we wanted.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a great case of inspirational storytelling. When you look at that comment thread, and you guys should you can go on the Expedia page and scroll down. I don't remember the date exactly. When
like October 3rd.
Yeah,
or something like that,
you'll see the video. It's highlighted on their timeline, and I mean, the comments are fantastic, and I mean, you really, I mean, it was a very compelling piece of creative. But you really hit on something with that. And then I think the way that you chose to, how you rolled that out and who you rolled it out to was really smart as well. And you're right. I mean, that's the whole thing about what we're seeing Expedia do in the travel space, and what's really interesting to us is that, they're in a space where it's sometimes from a consumer's perspective, you don't see a lot of differentiation. You guys are starting to differentiate yourselves with the way that you're
yeah, that's right. And I think, less lofty than marriage equality, certainly, but, you think about sort of taking these issues, or like your example of the VMAs, you sort of take other things that are sort of happening out there. So right now, if you go on our Facebook page, there's a big Usher promotion. So, because going back to sort of that issue of hotels are really excited to work with Expedia because of our social media strategy. We have this killer deal that if you want to go to Mexico during the holidays, you can get free tickets to go see Usher, and there's a big giveaway associated with it, and all kinds of sort of bells and whistles around that. But it's a great example of, oh, my friend really likes Usher, they're going to sort of see this campaign, or my friend likes Expedia and they're going to see this campaign, and it sort of meets somewhere in the middle where you get a lot of these sort of friend recommendations, and that can go very viral and be very, very positive.
We have time for one more question, I think, before we open it up to Q&A, and I would just love to get your thoughts across the board. Again, 3 very different businesses, 4, that you guys are working on. How do you think about measurement and all this stuff? So we're talking about, a lot of different strategies here, and, I know that data, there have been a lot of discussions about data the last day and a half, and there's lots of data that Facebook has, and of course, on the media side, there's lots of data that you guys are looking at as well. How do you think about that internally?
For us, with our social channels, we look at a lot of things. We look at our engagement, obviously, our reach, and our audience growth KPIs. We're fortunate that those tend to be really good for us, but because of that, we want to make sure they stay really high. One of the biggest ones for us, as far as our social channels go, is reach. There have been changes to EdgeRank in the last year that have hampered that a little bit. It used to be that we could actually get more reach on a post than we had fans to the page when we'd have really high engagement posts. Facebook doesn't let us do that anymore, unfortunately. But we still
Paul, I think there's a question for you in there.
Yeah, I don't think so.
That's really still what we strive for. Is we look for high engagement on a per post basis, right? We want lots of likes and comments and shares. We want those in order to get large reach in the EdgeRank algorithm. Because as I said earlier, we need those community posts to get out into people's feeds. We need them to see them, to remind them that they need to come back and play our games, as opposed to the dozens of other games they're probably playing on Facebook. It's become an incredibly, incredibly competitive landscape in the last couple of years. So our ability to maintain strong communities, have great engagement, and get really, really good reach on the platform is one of the edges we have, and one of the reasons why we have really, really high retention and engagement on a lot of our games.
So I'll have a 2-pronged answer. I feel like a presidential candidate. So I think, our social teams look at similar social KPIs. So, reach, engagement, growth of our fan base, sentiment, things like that. I think we're balancing that with, you tend to find pieces of content or strategies that work, but we're also, most of our brands are trying to either evolve the brand or grow the brand, and so you need to diversify. And so you're sort of balancing like this proven thing that is going to get a lot of engagement with needing to stretch and push and giving things time to grow as you're trying to move in different directions. And then with my media hat on, we do a lot of, so that's, I would say, more what the social teams at Microsoft are looking at. Sitting in the media team, we're very ROI driven in terms of our paid dollars and where to invest those. And so we do a lot of fancy media mix modeling to look at and attribute our spend and movement in our metrics and sort out where that is coming from so that we can understand what's moving the needle and where is spend disproportionately having an impact, so that in the future we can invest in these amplifiers, but also not getting totally stuck in that, because that's a rear view mirror lens. So being mindful of where's media going and where's consumption going and where are consumers engaging, and balancing, the sort of historical data with, art and science.
So I think ours is a little bit different, given that we're all about e-commerce, right? And so I think we're actually in the process of sort of rethinking a lot of our social dashboards to say, hey, how do we sort of think about traditional social metrics and sort of who are we reaching and how, and sort of what's the virality of a post? How are we thinking about how this compares to brands? So, how does someone who sees our sort of new ad campaign only on television versus someone who's experiencing our ad campaign online, and what are how do those sort of traditional brand metrics compare for each of those different populations? And then looking at direct response and saying, what are we actually driving from a bottom line perspective directly, and then sort of as for sort of billboard effect and sort of overall lift of the market or of those hotels or things like that. And then the last is sort of that holy grail of what's the value of a fan. Is that someone who's going to come back over and over again, and over time as we invest in those fans, what do we see in terms of loyalty? So
Okay.
take that.
Yeah. And I think that means it's time for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, and there is a mic in the middle of the room if you have a question. All right, you can shout it out.
Managing ads on Facebook is a total nightmare, especially for larger clients. Are there any tools in particular that you're using to help ease that pain?
So yes, it is. No offense. And it's actually been one of those sort of things that's been sort of interesting at Expedia about thinking about how we scale, right? So you think about, okay, well, we're going to take Cancun and we're just going to focus on Cancun for a week, and that's sort of a reasonable sort of piece of the apple to bite off, right? Like, okay, we could totally manage that. And then as we're really looking to the future, we're saying, oh gosh, we want to have Vegas and Disneyland and Cancun and New York all happening at the same time, sort of reaching different people. And that's something where we're sort of in the process of evaluating that sort of tool set now. We've started to do some work with Graph Effect. We're working a lot with sort of Paul's team directly at Facebook to say, hey, how do we scale this up as quickly as possible? But I think, I bet over the next year, the entire tool set is going to get tremendously better.
And I think, and I'll just jump in real quickly. I think that, at Facebook, so we have a whole group of preferred marketing developers that have tools that you can either you can use their tools, or you can hire them to actually run the ad campaigns for you. And I think that from a philosophical standpoint, what you've seen over the last year is that when Facebook rolls out something new, we tend to roll it out in our ads API first. So we're really giving the community that's tapped into our advertising API, which are a huge number of partners, the ability to get in there and be able to execute and set up their own systems to be able to execute. And I know that if you're not working with someone that's tapped into that, maybe it makes it a little bit challenging. But I think we still have certain partners that we'll manage media buys directly with. But I feel like the future is going to be more of the marketplace being able to manage that themselves, to be able to tap into all the inventory, even the premium inventory on Facebook.
I was going to add one thing. I think it's a great question, and I think it's particularly as people invest more in social as a channel. I've found for Microsoft and our agencies, it is pressuring the system, and we're going through some growth pains. So, where our media agency is accustomed to running campaigns that are not necessarily 24/7 or on a Saturday night, or as manual, we're adjusting right now, I would say, in terms of both tools, but also just people and how we staff for that.
Yeah, I don't spend a lot of time with the keys to it, but at PopCap we use a platform called Nanigans to handle our Facebook ads and some of our other ad spend. And I do know, here's a little plug for your team, courtesy of Erica. Facebook has a new mobile ads product coming out for the mobile platform. So app developers, make sure you're on the new 3.1 mobile SDK so you can use that.
I do think that your point's really interesting, though, about, it's about tools and it's about people. I think, at least for sort of where we've been, we kind of used to put social in this kind of amateur hour sort of bucket of like, oh, well, we can kind of manage it, like dip in, dip out. And then as we're starting to see more and more ROI, it really is time to turn it into a true business channel and a true marketing channel and sort of put the same level of talent. I mean, we've got a new sort of head of social who's fantastic, and sort of put that level of talent and that level of investment behind your media buys the same way you would in your other digital media buys or your television buys or whatever you'd be doing.
Any other questions? One question. Must be late in the afternoon.
I've got one for you.
All right.
So what is the value of a fan, and how do you make sure that value corresponds to your business results?
Do you guys want to talk about that?
You look like you had something to say.
Sure, I'm happy to. So we did. So we're starting some work to sort of measure the sort of new fan base that we have. But so the last sort of full study that we did was about a year ago. We did this big program called Friend Trips. That was, I think, to this day, it's the largest sweepstakes in Facebook history. It had over $1 million worth of prizes. And grew our fan base astronomically in the course of about 5 weeks. And so what we wanted to do sort of after that was say, okay, well, great, how do we think about the fact that like, oh, we just spent all this money on ads getting this fan base, like, oh, we should really do something with them. And so we looked at sort of what's the value of a fan, and what we've seen are a couple things. So one is how much more do they spend with us, and sort of looking at what that sort of incremental transactions and incremental bookings are. We also look at how much more likely they are to come back to the site, how much more time they spend on Expedia.com than sort of the average person, and it's sort of across the board. It's sort of double or triple what the average person is in terms of all of those, in terms of gross bookings, in terms of visits, and in terms of time sort of spent per visit.
For us, this is something that's obviously really important to everybody who works in social marketing, and like you said earlier, Paul, it's kind of the holy grail question. I'm trying to recall these numbers off the top of my head, so they may not be dead on accurate, but it'll give you some sense of scale. In one game that we looked at, we saw a correlation in that among people who were monetizing in that game, people who monetized and were fans, I believe the number was 7x. So they were monetizing 7x better than non-fan monetizers. So that's pretty good. Again, it's just correlation. We can't say it's causation, that because they were a fan, they monetized more, but there is a nice correlation there. So it's something that we keep looking into.
Yeah, and I can say, I think across the brands that I work on, we have a lot of consistent data that shows, engagement and perception and things are higher amongst fans than non-fans. That's kind of obvious. I mean, you would certainly hope that that was the case. I think we've put a lot of investment into sort of getting a relative value on the scale, and this is from a media lens, but being able to say, we were able to see that our investment in social as a channel and the paid media against it was driving larger returns than some of our traditional media. And that helped us to then, so, I think there's the community that you're reaching, but then there's also like how is that accruing to a national goal or an end goal? And so that's where we invest a lot at Microsoft in terms of trying to understand investment levels. So ideally those two things can work together where you can say, great, with this audience that we have, these 19 million fans of Xbox, we want to continue to engage and activate the space, and that's very important to our brand and how we activate our campaigns. But also, in the grand scheme of the campaign, it goes beyond just those people because they're reaching additional people. And how do we put the right level of investment and the right level of value on that?
And it's a really good question that comes up all the time. And I think the reason that and not to speak for our marketing team, but I think the reason that you don't see one definitive paper on that from Facebook is because the analysis has to be done at the company side to really identify what's the value of your fan. And there's studies like ComScore, the Power of Like, they put the Power of Like 2 came out this year. And one thing that's not really written about very often, so that dives into like how much more your fans tend to spend than non-fans and what the loyalty is looking like. But what you don't see written about very much is also the impact that your fans have on the efficacy of your media. So for example, Nielsen's done a lot of research that shows that when you run an ad on Facebook that has word of mouth, has your friends as part of it, you see a much higher brand awareness, much higher ad recall. And we see from DR advertisers that they tend to see better results. So if your fan base, so for example, if Expedia has 1.5 million fans, they can probably reach about 80 million people with ads with social contacts where their friends are part of the advertising experience, and those ads tend to do better. They tend to perform better, and that's something that I've yet to really see a great study that quantifies that as well, but I know a lot of individual businesses that look at that as well. We have time for one more.
Yeah, I can answer that to some degree. So, we definitely look at that when it differs, but across the brands that I work on. But when we do put dollars into acquiring fans, we're very thoughtful about that. I think I'll say in the case of Bing, particularly in the early stages of the brand, we tried a lot of different tactics. We did a huge Farmville promotion. We did a lot of just like very broad acquisition, but we certainly saw that, there was retention issues when you do something that's too incentivized, for example. So we spent a lot of time looking at trying different things and really looking at, okay, great, we might have acquired them efficiently, but then they just churned out. And so, so I don't have like a definitive number, but it is something we watch very closely, and we spend a lot of time looking at distinct, not only like the targeting, but even the media partners that are helping us to craft those campaigns to sort out what's the right fan. Do you want to find the right person that's engaged at the most cost-efficient rate, and so it's something we look at very closely.
So I couldn't agree with that more, and it's something that we care a ton about. So, go back to that sort of Friend Trips promotion, right? Like you have $1 million worth of prizes, and they're big, awesome trips, right? So it's, go to Tahiti, go to, spend a month going all over South America, big, awesome sort of trips of a lifetime. But we absolutely got, we spent a ton of money and got a lot of fans, but they weren't necessarily the real fans that we wanted. They're not fans who are highly engaged in travel. They're not, they're people who just sort of wanted to go on a free trip. And if you sort of look at our fan growth since Friend Trips ended, it's been much more sort of strategic, much more focused on, hey, how do we actually sort of engage high likelihood to travel fans. And people who are going to sort of be brand advocates. And so we've grown more slowly, but I think much more thoughtfully. And we sort of continue to look at that mix both on Facebook and on Twitter to say, are these people who are interested in travel, or what are the other things that our fans are fans of? And I think that's made a huge difference. And you think about it from an EdgeRank perspective. if you have a bunch of people who actually don't care about travel, when you post something about travel, they're not going to comment on it. And over time, a sort of a poor quality fan base is actually really going to hurt your organic numbers.
Yeah, having all of our users on platform and engaged, we don't ever do paid fan acquisition. We do paid user acquisition, but all of our fan growth is organic. So I can't really speak to that. But what they're saying, I mean, what we see as far as moving users around from game to game and players on Facebook, absolutely right. If you over-incentivize things, if you go into populations that aren't going to be engaged, you sort of get those fair weather fans, if you will, that are just there to get whatever the bonus is, the prize is, the incentive is of any kind, and they're going to run away. They're not really engaging with your page, which is, I mean, something Facebook sort of discourages generally and tends to not be great for your business as well.
Yeah, and I think that what we've seen in terms of fan acquisition is I've seen a lot of brands really using our targeting a lot better in a lot better ways right now, because the targeting on Facebook is fantastic. So to be able to really, and it goes back to that quality of that fan that you're looking for, let's use their likes and interests and all these other targeting to make sure that Expedia gets travel enthusiasts within that age bracket that they want, that Bing gets the 18 to 34-year-old who are, you know, active in using the web. And then the last piece of that is making sure when you are running, if you are running ads to get fans, like call out what is the value proposition of being a fan of Expedia. It's like, well, you love travel, you want to be inspired, you want to be able to connect with daily deals, you want to see what the latest hotel, you know, like just call it out to people, like what the benefit is of engaging with and connecting to your brand, because you don't really want them to be surprised when they get there. So it's doing that, and then it's also using sponsored stories to show them when their friends do connect with you as well. Real quick.
So what do you think about the establishment of a quality score for fans? Because to your point, it's really easy to drive cheap, and optimize yourself out of a person that you'd actually really care about having. So aside from PTAT, are you guys looking at some sort of aggregated way to make it more easy for the C-suites and the decision makers to really understand and process the difference between someone who isn't high value versus someone who
There's definitely discussion. I mean, I've definitely had those discussions. I haven't seen anything in a roadmap for that, but I think that the way that, you know, brands getting away from trying to get the person, you know, maybe someone that you paid, you know, $1 for that has the targeting, the rich targeting that you want, and that engaged with you and liked you for based on the right messaging, is worth a lot more than somebody that you signed up for at 30 cents, you know, and that you just shotgunned across the U.S. Like, you know, we see that, and we see that being really effective, and the engagement goes up on the pages when you do that. But yeah, I think it's a good idea. If you show me how to do that, maybe we'll build that. All right, very good. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we're out of time, so come up if you have any questions, and we appreciate you coming.